Good evening, Mansfield's Money Sense. A few weeks ago, we were talking about debt counselling, and we got a huge reaction to that particular show. So what we thought we'd do is take you to a position before you have to go to debt counselling. Hopefully you're not in that position at the moment. But that's why we've invited in Joe Cimino, who is the Corporate Solutions Director at Financial Fitness Training, and Jim Millar, MD of Financial Fitness Training, into the studio. Good evening, gentlemen.
How you doing, Jeremy?
Nice to have you with us. We've got an we bring in all the international guests on this show. Joe, originally from Chicago.
Correct.
And Jim from a little town in Ireland.
Newtownards.
Newtownards. Yeah. The only reason I know that particular town is because my wife's family originally comes from Newtownards in Ireland.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's a great little town.
It's a great little town. Lovely people as well. Great pubs.
Oh yes.
Great pubs.
30 pubs in one little town.
Yeah, and less people than pubs actually.
Yeah.
Right, let's get down to it. Just give us a brief, so we can put it in context, Jim. What do you guys do?
We teach people how to manage their money, how to eliminate debt, and how to start building wealth. So we run personal financial training courses on those topics, including retirement planning. And then we provide services to back that up and to basically assist people in implementing the plan that they really need to have to become efficient with their money.
If we are looking at debt, and debt is a huge factor in South Africa, are people managing their debt properly, Joe?
No. I mean, if you look at the numbers coming out of the National Credit Regulator, 48.7% of the people are in arrears on their payments. The average debt-to-income ratio is 78.6% of their take-home pay goes on debt. And there was an article which came out a few months ago talking about there's 300,000 houses either in arrears or already in foreclosure. So it's actually quite severe. I mean, when you look at 78% of your take-home on debt, if you bring home 10, that leaves you with $2,200 for the month. That's eking out a living. I don't see how, you know, with all the petrol increases and the electricity increases coming, it's really going to be bad.
But we've discussed this in various shows. The reason why people get into debt, and there are a whole host of reasons behind that. But how do you manage that debt? Because that's becoming the problem.
Well, what I see out there, and I'm one of the main trainers, is a lot of people are very, very consumeristic. They want it all, they want it now, and they've been put in this position where if they want to play with it now, pay for it later. And that's absolutely the worst case scenario. I mean, right before the National Credit Act came out, the banks flooded everybody with free gold cards. And I think we're really seeing the end result of that as well. Now, with the National Credit Regulator has saved a lot of people from hurting themselves, but they're still out there doing it. I mean, even after coming off of Christmas, the holidays, you know, a lot of people came back and they're broke. We're getting a lot of calls from corporations to come in and do training, and it's just sad, the stories I hear, but you know, what we try to do is empower them with the knowledge, because they really don't have the knowledge. They think that if they buy a car at 13% interest, it's 13% interest, but when you look at it over a 5-year period, it could be like 41% interest. But that's not what they're being told.
But how, Jim, how do we start looking at a plan here? And how do you start? It's a little bit overwhelming, isn't it? Because you go, okay, I've got bond, I've got car payments, I've got policies. How do you assimilate all of that and try and cut down your costs? Because that, I think, is what's killing people, is the cost behind what they think they're going to get at the end of the day.
Yes. We often see people who are trying to pay a credit card, but they're paying the minimum every month. They're paying their car, paying their bond, and they're also paying 300 Rand a month into an education policy for their child, which is highly inefficient. They're earning a very little return on that policy. They're paying high interest rates on credit. If they were to redirect the money that they think they're saving into paying off debt, they would pay it off far more quickly. We simply start with the smallest debt first, pay that off as quickly as possible, and then roll that money that you're paying on that debt into the next debt, so you start a snowball effect to pay off your debts more quickly. So there is a way to do it. You have to show people the simple first step, second step, and so on. There's a way to do it for most people. If they reach us before they get into the debt trap situation where they're essentially using debt to pay off debt.
What is generally the smallest debt around? I would imagine it's the credit card.
Store account. Store account. And you know, it's quite simple, just to add on what Jim was saying. You're saving in a bank at 5% and you're paying a bond at 9%.
But
going
people
backwards.
don't look at it that way.
No, they don't, because they...
Why?
Well, I think they've been trained to think like that. You know, like I said earlier, they want it now. I mean, I look at the people driving the new cars on the road when my car's paid off. I bought it cash. And I see the look on their face going into work every morning, and they just don't look happy. And I think they're being misled down the road, you know. There's as Jim said again, they're saving a little money into some savings account where they're getting 12 Rand a month in interest, but they're paying 4,100 Rand a month in interest on their bond. That's what they need to get rid of. As he said, getting out of debt is probably one of the most empowering things, and then you start working on saving and building your wealth.
Okay, I am in a situation where I have got debt and I would like to get rid of it. What is the first thing I do?
Well, you need to have a debt
position. Let's go baby steps here.
Baby steps.
Right.
You need to understand what your debt position is first. We use what we call a debt position worksheet, which essentially looks at what is your capital outstanding, what is your monthly payment, what's your interest charge, what's the total that you're going to end up paying in the next 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. We can help with working that out. You know, if the individual doesn't know how to do the calculation, we can help them to do that.
How many individuals know how to do that calculation?
Well, if you take your monthly payment by the number of months you've got left, that's how much you're going to pay. Okay. So, you know, so if you ask the average person, how much do you owe on your bond, they'll say, you know, 500,000. But in fact, if they take their monthly payment and multiply that by 20 years, they might owe 1.5 million. So it is in fact a far bigger number, but they're not looking at that because they don't want to look at it, or they're not, as Joe says, they're not trained to look at that. You're only trained to look at what the outstanding balance is, not including all the interest charges. So once you get an idea what the picture is, then we start with the smallest debt first and try and get rid of that. If we can get rid of the store account, that might be 500 or even 1,000 Rand a month that we could utilize somewhere else to get rid of pay off a car more quickly or start paying off the bond more quickly. So it's really, most people have the cash flow. It's just going all in the wrong directions, dissipated energy. They're not using their money very well.
But do we have because it comes back to what Joe was saying about we want it now. Do we have it's all very well you pointing this out to me and saying you need to get rid of your store account. Do we have the discipline and the self-management skills to do that?
You can be trained. The key is you got to get that training. Most people really only understand they have a problem when they hit rock bottom and they can't make their payments. That's when they realize they have a problem. I did that back in the States, to where, you know, you don't pay this account 1 month.
Is that why you're living in South Africa
now? No, actually, because this thing worked for me. And so I came here. I was tied up in knots by the banks back in the States, and not a good position. Depressed and all that, what a lot of people here are feeling, you know. And when you become debt-free, it's something that just gives you the empowerment to continue. But most people don't get the necessary training. And that's the key. You know, they're told your home is your best investment. You buy an 800,000 Rand house, you're going to pay 2.4 million for it. I was paying 2.4 million for an 800,000 Rand house, your best investment. But yet that's what they're told. Now it might be worth 2.4 million in 20 years, but that's still getting your money back. Still not an investment. and they buy the starter home first with 2 kids, and then 5 years later, they have a couple more kids. They got to buy another house. 15 years later, they want to move next to me in Santon. And so they've had 3 bonds of 20 years. They call it a 20-year bond. That's 60 years worth of bonds technically. They work 40 years. So a lot of the numbers, and it goes back to what he said, when you get your statement on the bond, that's not what you owe. You owe $500,000 if you go in there with a check for $500,000. When you add up all your monthly payments, that's the key. And our philosophy works on Alcoholics Anonymous, which is you got to admit. You got to admit.
Go, cut, hold it. We're sitting here trying to talk finance, and you say we're working on the basis of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Well, just the first rule, which is admit. Most people refuse to admit the problem they have. And with the high number of divorces in the country and the ever-evolving lifestyles people have, they move out, they separate, child support, that's all coming down the road for these people. So if they see they only owe $500,000 on the house, $80,000 on the car, and $27,000 on the credit cards, that's what they're told. When you add those payments up, it becomes 3 or 4 times higher. You have to understand that amount and admit you have the problem before you can even begin the cure.
Do we admit this?
To admit that...
Do we admit to it? The majority of people who go through your course, do they admit to it?
The people who go through our course generally do admit to it, because we make it very clear to them what they're giving up in the future because of the little bit of pleasure they're having now. You know, buying that next TV or that next car might feel like fun for a month or 2, but ultimately they're keeping themselves totally tied up in the debt trap. And they will never experience any real freedom. They will never accumulate any real wealth, which will give them the ability to make choices that most people only ever dream of. But in actual fact, the majority of people could be truly wealthy within their lifetime if they use their income correctly, if they use their income efficiently.
Here's a really good tip, and one of the things I teach.
No, hang on. You're going to get to that tip in just a moment, because we've got to go to an ad break. We'll come back with that tip. He's Joe, he's Jim, I'm Jeremy. We're financial alcoholics. Cheers.